Meet the Press. John.
Hello and welcome to Meet the Press. This weekend, one of the newest and most successful political parties in Australia, the LNP, is holding its state convention in Queensland. An amalgam of the Liberal and National parties. Its members separate when they get to Canberra. The party, which is a division of the Federal Liberal Party, supplies the Nationals in Canberra with a leader and then competes against the Liberals in other states for votes. But at least they have a common enemy.
The pipeline's choked. It's blocked up. It's blocked up by government red tape and green tape and black tape, and it needs a good, decent flush out.
Well, 3 years ago, the National Senate leader campaigned against the Liberals' carbon pricing policy.
That's the end of our beef industry, Michelle. It'll be the end of our sheep industry. I don't think your working mothers are going to be very happy when they're paying over $100 for a roast, as they put it in the shopping trolley.
Impressed, Tony Abbott took over the great big tax campaign and brought Barnaby Joyce inside the tent.
Barnaby is probably Australia's most accomplished retail politician.
Then, Senate Nationals ditched their support for the NBN they claimed was their policy and towed the Liberal line. So where does that leave the Nationals when regional Australia heard this on Thursday?
We have some 10,000 premises countrywide now covered.
The Nationals leader, Warren Truss, is a guest. And later, Julian Burnside QC on how to break the asylum seeker impasse. But first, Melanie Davies has what's making news this Sunday, July 15.
Thanks, Paul. Good morning. Prime Minister Julia Gillard will stare down critics of her deal with the Greens this morning when she addresses the New South Wales Labor Party conference. After bitter debate yesterday, delegates voted to deny the Greens automatic preferences during elections. Foreign Minister Bob Carr says Malaysia still supports the refugee people swap despite the political deadlock in Australia. The minister says he's spoken to his Malaysian counterpart who wants to go ahead with the deal. Australia is taking fewer refugees from overseas camps than before because of the surge in boat arrivals. Liberal National Party President Bruce McIver has warned Conservatives at the Queensland State Convention that it won't be easy to win the next federal election. Also at the convention, billionaire Clive Palmer says he's considering setting up an online newspaper called Rage. And SAS soldier Blaine Diddams has been farewelled with full military honours in Perth. The sergeant was killed earlier this month while on his 7th tour of duty in Afghanistan. And those are the top stories this morning. Paul.
Thanks, Melanie, and welcome back to the program, Warren Truss. Good morning, Mr. Truss.
Good morning.
Were you surprised when LNP State President Bruce McIver said that the success isn't assured at the next election? I think it had surprised the Labor Party. They seem to be in some sort of panic. Do you think he was overstating the case?
No, I think it will be hard to win the next election. It's true that the Australian people are well and truly sick and tired of the Labor brand. They've seen waste and mismanagement and incompetence in dealing with the key issues in the states. They see it also at the federal level, but we still have to prove to the Australian people that we are a competent alternative, that we will deliver a better Australia in the future. Now, we've been working very hard at developing policy, putting before the Australian people a platform which really demonstrates that we have the capability to turn this country around. But in the end, we still have to convince the Australian people that we represent a better alternative.
Well, do you agree?
It's not just good enough to vote out Labor because they're hopeless. We've also got to demonstrate that we can do the job a lot better.
Well, do you agree with Bruce McIver when he says you've been too negative?
Well, I think that it's been a situation where Labor have given us a lot to be critical of. Almost everything that they do has turned into a disaster. But we have also had a very positive agenda. Tony Abbott and others have been making regular speeches which have been outlining our vision and our objectives for the future. If you look at the things that we've been saying on our websites, the key speeches at our conferences, etc., they are full of positive messages. And we'll have a lot more of that to say as we get towards the election itself. But we've got a positive agenda. We're determined to turn our country around.
Well, this week you're going on a road trip. You're going to drive from Brisbane to Cairns, obviously to inspect the Bruce Highway. You've got a lot of, historically, there's a lag here. The Howard government, on figures I've seen, spent $1.3 billion in 11 years on the Bruce Highway. The Gillard-Rudd government in 5 years has spent $2.7 billion. Will you be more serious if you win the next election?
Well, those are mischievous figures. I could just as easily compare what we spent with what the previous Labor government had spent. What is a fact is that everyone needs to do more on the Bruce Highway. Campbell Newman has committed the incoming LNP government to an extra $1 billion for the Bruce Highway. Clearly, the federal government needs to match that offer, and we must make it a serious priority. 1 in 6 deaths on the National Highway is occurring on the Bruce Highway, and for that reason alone, we need to be doing more to make it a safer and better linking network for the Queensland coastal cities.
A couple of weeks ago, Tony Abbott at the Federal Liberal Council announced billions of dollars for roads in the 3 capitals on the eastern seaboard. Will you be announcing Liberal or national policy on the Bruce Highway once you've done your inspection tour?
Well, we'll be talking about coalition policy and indeed the investment in capital city roads, in the Toowoomba Range bypass, etc., and on the Bruce Highway will all be Liberal and National Party initiatives. But we'll have certainly a commitment to make in relation to the Bruce Highway. At the last 2 elections, we committed to get the 4-laning up to Curra by 2020. Now, clearly, with what Labor has done in the interim, that's not going to be achievable, but we are determined to make a substantial investment on the Bruce Highway so that this vital national link can reach the standard we expect and not be cut every time there's a storm or a cyclone along the Queensland coast.
Well, Mr Trust, one of your very own constituents, a delegate from Noosa at the LNP convention, successfully moved to have climate change science not taught in Queensland schools. He says it's propaganda, the science isn't set. So with that sort of attitude amongst the members of your own party, can you give a guarantee this morning that direct action, the coalition policy to combat climate change taken to the last election, will survive to the next election and beyond?
Well, we are certainly committed to a plan of direct action to do things that reduce CO2 emissions, but are also good for the environment in their own right. You know, cleaning up dirty power stations is obviously a good thing for us to do. Planting more trees, building healthier soils, all of those sorts of things are good things to do for our environment, and we're committed to them. They make a contribution towards CO2 emissions, but they also help build a better environment for us to all enjoy.
Well, just one question. My colleague on Channel 10 here, Andrew Bolt, asked Anthony Albanese last week, how much will your billions of dollars cut the temperature? Can I put the same question to you? How much will your billions of dollars cut the temperature? Well, I think that the idea that anything that Australia can do when we are responsible for 1% of global emissions is actually going to alter the global temperature is clearly a nonsense. Not even the respected scientific community make that argument. The reality is that if there's going to be a response to temperature rise, then that has to be a global response. And if we close down all Australian industry and move all our manufacturing offshore, stop growing any crops and food in this country, it's not going to make any difference to the global temperature, especially since this industry is simply going to be transferred to other countries where the same environmental standards are not in place. Well, I think his point is that the billions you're going to spend aren't going to make any difference either. We might have to come back to that argument another day because it's time for a break. When we return with the panel, has the National Broadband Network got a future in regional Australia under an Abbott government? And Sydney was as mad as hell. Brisbane got the G20 until this gotcha of the week.
The heads of Russia, of Britain, are going to be taken to Brisbane and told that this is the gateway city to Australia is just ridiculous. We've got the Opera House, we've got the harbour, we've got the heads of companies, we've got the biggest GDP. This is where it should be.
They've got the Gateway Bridge.
They've got the Gateway Bridge, you're right. Can't argue about that one.
You're on Meet the Press with Nationals leader Warren Truss, and welcome to the panel, Paul Osborne, AAP, and Patricia Cavallis, The Australian. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Both.
Morning, Mark.
The Prime Minister went to Townsville on Thursday to announce a huge expansion of the NBN into the most isolated areas of outback Australia.
Today, I'm able to announce that NBN Co has signed a contract worth $280 million to deliver the on-the-ground infrastructure necessary for those satellite services to be received. It also means dishes will go on 200,000 premises in the most remote parts of Australia so they can get the benefit of broadband through the satellite service.
Mr Truss, will you roll back what is being planned by NBN Co in regional and remote Australia if Tony Abbott wins the next election?
Well, let me remind you that had the coalition been re-elected in 2007, those satellite services would already be in place. The wireless services would already be in place under our Optus contract. So we had committed to provide those services.
Sure, but that's all
they
in the
would
past.
have been in
There's
place
now a plan.
already.
There's now a plan that's being organised by NBN Co in regional and remote Australia. Will you stay with that plan?
Well, that's a demonstration that we supported wireless and we supported satellite services for regional and remote communities, and of course we won't be tearing out existing infrastructure. What the Prime Minister's announcement was, though, was yet another broken promise. She said that the suburbs of large provincial cities like Townsville and Rockhampton and Mackay are now only going to get wireless. She had promised them that they were going to get fibre optic cable to the home. So in reality, Labor's promise to provide fibre optic services to 95% of the Australian population is in tatters. Well, the NBN is way behind schedule, it's way over cost, and it's not going to deliver fibre optic services to anything like the number of Australians that Labor promised.
Well, Mr Truss, in April 2009, before he was brought into the tent of Shadow Cabinet, Barnaby Joyce embraced the NBN in a press release. He said, "How could we disagree with something that is quite evidently our idea? It is vitally important that the NBN gets to the corners of our country where the market has failed at a price that is both affordable and a service that is comparable."
Mr Truss, isn't this the case of the Liberal Party dictating rural policy to the Nationals?
No, we were very much a part of putting in place the Optus contract, which would have delivered and would have delivered by now wireless and satellite services to people who live in regional Australia. So we remain committed to providing the highest standard of broadband services to people who live in regional Australia, and that'll remain our commitment on election to office.
Mr Truss, let me take you to Barnaby Joyce. Now, his ambitions are well known. He wants to enter the lower house. Can you guarantee that you will be Nationals leader if Tony Abbott wins the election and be Deputy Prime Minister?
Well, I'm the Nationals leader. That choice is in the hands of my colleagues. I'm confident that I have their support and that when Tony Abbott is elected Prime Minister, I'll be Deputy Prime Minister.
So you're prepared to fight Barnaby Joyce to maintain that position if he makes a bid for that leadership?
I won't need to fight Barnaby Joyce. Barnaby Joyce and I are good friends, working colleagues, and I'm sure we'll be part of a great team in a coalition government.
But do you endorse him running in Maranoa?
Well, Barnaby has indicated that he wants to make a move to the lower house. I welcome his capacity to make a contribution to the House of Representatives. It's up to him to choose the pathway that would get him to that position. And of course, pre-selections are still many, many months away in seats like Maranoa.
Well, do you agree with Tony Abbott that he is indeed probably the best retail politician in the country? And if that's the case, why wouldn't you lean on Bruce Scott to make way for the younger, more talented, maybe politician?
Well, Barnaby certainly has a wonderful way of cutting through complicated issues with simple lines that mean things to people. He certainly has a way of putting the issues in simple and clear language, and that's a very, very valuable asset for any team. We need people who've got capabilities in a whole range of areas. Some people need to provide the high standards of management in portfolios to ensure that we're able to manage our country well. Others are good at selling the message, and certainly Barnaby fits into that category, and that's why he's such a valuable part of our team.
Maybe foreman material. But moving on to another issue, despite the Navy, retired admirals, the Immigration Department and the Indonesian government warning against a tow back the boats policy, the coalition is resolute, much to the government's disgust.
What Mr Abbott is doing here is effectively playing Russian roulette with the lives of Australian sailors.
Well, Mr Truss, the former Defence Chief Angus Houston is working on a compromise solution which he'll present around about when Parliament comes back. Is the coalition committed to genuinely looking at that solution, or are you going to be a brick wall?
Well, of course we'll listen to whatever Angus Houston has to say. But on the other hand, we've made our policy clear. I hope that, that Angus Houston will take into account what has happened in the past, the policies that have worked in the past,
and
have the capacity to work again in the future.
Is there any chance that the Coalition will accept Angus Houston's proposition?
Well, we don't know what Angus Houston's propositions will be. I hope his propositions might be to do things like reintroduce temporary protection visas, turn vessels around where it's safe, reintroduce an effective offshore processing arrangement. If he comes forward with policies like that have got a proven record of achievement, well, then he can count on our support.
Well, thank you very much for being with us this morning, Warren Truss.
You're very welcome.
And coming up, refugee advocate Julian Burnside QC. And Labor gets little sympathy for its war with the Greens from cartoonist Kadelka in The Australian.
Still nothing? Oh, bloody Greens. Probably nicked them again.
I think if I could dictate policy on this, I'd say you shouldn't reduce the offshore resettlement program in order to accommodate asylum seekers who arrive by boat, typically. Because, frankly, I think we're a big enough country and a generous enough country to be able to maintain the offshore resettlement program, which is a very good one, but also add the asylum seekers who come here by boat. You know, the offshore resettlement program is 13,750 people a year. On current indications, we may get 5,000 boat people here this year. Well, you know, compared to our annual migration of 200,000 people, it's not a lot. It really isn't that hard. And for some reason, the Howard government decided that for every boat person who came, they'd knock one off the offshore resettlement program. There's no reason for doing that.
Do you concede, though, that the politics have shifted dramatically now? Onshore processing now, other than the Greens, nobody appears to support it. I mean, it makes your position very difficult to maintain.
Well, you know, I mean, I'm just responding to what both the Labor Party and the Coalition say is their principal concern, namely people drowning at sea. Well, if they're serious about that, A, they will not reintroduce temporary protection visas, which mean that getting on a boat is the only way families can get back together. And B, they won't say, we'll save you from the risk of a boat journey after you've taken it. And yet that's what their solutions both involve. You know, if we can get sensible and arrange a diplomatic solution with Indonesia, then what I'm proposing, I suspect, could be quite effective. It will certainly be effective to prevent people drowning at sea. Of course, the other thing, to be brutally honest about it, the fact that it is a dangerous voyage is one of the reasons that such a high percentage of boat people who get here turn out to be genuine refugees. You know, it's a filter. You've got to be desperate. You've got to be people like that woman who we just saw. You've got to be fleeing dangers of that sort to take the risks which they do take. Now, of the boat people who've arrived in the last 15 years, about 90% plus have been assessed as genuine refugees, whereas people who come here by aeroplane and claim asylum succeed in their claims in about 20% of cases. Why? They don't have to take a risk.
Julian, you talk about solutions. Obviously, Angus Houston's working on a solution for the government, which they're hoping to get cross-party support. What hope do you hold in Angus Houston's solution, and what talks have you had with him?
Well, I did take part in a small symposium at Melbourne University on Friday afternoon, at which the 3 members of the task force were present, and I was very impressed with the way they were conducting the thing and the approach they're apparently taking. I do not know what solution he will propose, and I can't tell you in advance whether it's one that I would support or not. Whether it will be accepted by the major parties is really a question of contemporary politics, and it is so toxic at the moment and such a low level that I don't have any faith that either of the major parties will embrace a solution that is genuine.
Do you fear that what Angus Houston comes up with might have a balance of the sort of left and right solutions tending one way or the other?
Well, that would be a weird balance, because the left and right solutions at the moment are almost indistinguishable. And frankly, it's only the Greens who've got a somewhat different approach. And the Greens' approach seems to proceed from the proposition that receiving refugees is not such a terrible thing, and we can actually do it, and we can get by. You know, when you consider the number of boat people we received during Malcolm Fraser's years after the end of the Vietnam War, we were getting about 20,000 a year. The population of Australia was smaller, the economy was smaller. We coped perfectly well because he and Whitlam agreed not to make a fuss about it.
Doesn't it seem that the solution that you've proposed indeed this morning, which I think the Greens have been influenced by or agree with, many people would see this as fast-tracking, as making Australia, which is already an attractive, a magnet, if you like, for desperate people, even more of a magnet?
I accept that the proposal I've put forward may increase the number of people going to Indonesia to try and get a safe passage to Australia, and that will present challenges. But we have to stop and take you know, a moment to reflect on this. Years ago, Australia signed the Refugees Convention. By doing that, we agreed that we would give protection to people who need it. Now, if we're serious about that, we shouldn't be grumbling about the fact that there's a significant number of people who may come and ask for our help. You know, now I wonder how many people in Australia would say to that woman who we saw on the video, oh, no, we would not have helped you if you'd come to our door and asked for help. You know, most of the asylum seekers who've come to Australia in the last 15 years have been Hazaras like that woman, fleeing that sort of persecution.
Can I just briefly ask for some free legal advice here? The Coalition says that Stephen Gageler, the Solicitor General, has advised them that the safest way now, after the High Court, to proceed is only to offshore process in signatory countries. Would that be your view?
It being a signatory country is the first step, but it's not by itself enough. For example, take Nauru. Now, what does offshore processing mean? What it means for both of the major parties is send them away to another country and close the door behind them. Yeah. It doesn't mean process them there and then resettle them in Australia. Second, the High Court decision means pretty clearly that if Nauru is physically incapable of giving effect to its convention obligations, then sending them there does not discharge our international obligations. Now, you know, if you took Nauru...
So would that, just very briefly, because we have to go, would that mean that maybe even the Coalition would need more legislation if it wanted to send them to Nauru?
Oh, I'm sure they would.
Oh, OK.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for being with us today, Julian Burnside. And thanks to our panel, Patricia Cavallis and Paul Osborne. A transcript and a replay of this program will be on our website and Facebook page. Until next week, goodbye.